Assalamu alaikum fam, hope you're doing well. We are continuing our reading of Friedrich Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra. He is quite famous. He's not always as, people perceive him to be, but you can learn something new from the guy. He's pretty funny. You don't take everything he says to heart. And it's good to actually read his works than to just listen to people who have read it and give you like a summary. Going through this one by one, reflecting on it, will help us to process the information and have a whole, spectrum of correct viewpoints that are actually from the text themselves. So, let's begin. We were in this section that's titled On the Afterworldly. Believe me, my brothers, it was the body that despaired of the body, and touched the ultimate walls with the fingers of a deluded spirit. Believe me, my brothers, it was the body that despaired of the earth. So here, the body that despaired of the earth. Then he says, the body despaired of the body. So here you already see, despairing both in its physical form and its location. Maybe he's going to get at the sort of trapped type of analysis. And heard the belly of being speak to it. It wanted to crash through these ultimate walls with its head, and not only with its head over there to that world, but that world is well concealed from humans, that dehumanized inhuman world, which is a heavenly nothing. So here, you see what he's getting at? So the head constantly trying to wrestle with the fact that it wants to see the other world, the unseen. Now he's saying it's concealed. Yes, it is. It's the unseen. Now he says dehumanized inhuman world. Now, I would call Earth more of a dehumanized zone than the unseen, because you can't speak about what you don't know. But you never know if he's influenced by Catholic art, or it's just weird flying babies and, strange stuff. That's why you shouldn't paint depictions of paradise, because then it gives people this point of ridicule that makes them not want to strive for it. I wouldn't call it inhuman, I'd just call it paradise. Because when you say inhuman, it isn't human. But when you say inhuman, it has more of a negative underlying tone to it. And then he goes further and says, which is a heavenly nothing, which doesn't make sense in and of itself, because nothing is just nothing. If it's heavenly, then it's something, it's not nothing. In order for it to be heavenly, there has to be things there that make it substantially heavenly. That's why it's called heaven, right? It's different than earth. But I should just proceed. And the belly of being does not speak to humans at all, except as human. Verily, all being is hard to prove and hard to induce to speak. Well, yes, all being. I think he can also mean your overall will, your overall consciousness, your beingness, but also your existence as a being, right? Yeah, it is hard to prove who you are, what this is, right? But to induce it to speak, I would say is easy. The harder part is to verbalize it correctly, encapsulate it within words. Tell me, my brothers, is not the strangest of all things prove most nearly? That one's interesting. You hear what he said? The strangest of all things prove most nearly. So what's strange can be quite near. I'd say your hands. Your eyeball is pretty near. Go in the mirror and stare at it and watch it, and you're just like, what is that? It's quite strange. It is quite strange. Also, if you're sitting on a bench and you're watching an ant colony, it's pretty near and it's pretty strange. Look into the soil, it's pretty weird what's going on in there. Turn over a rock, it's pretty near. Some things going on you don't understand. It is quite strange. Indeed, this ego and the ego's contradiction and the confusion still speak most honestly of its being. So here, What is he getting at? The ego and the ego's contradiction. Because the ego can self-contradict sometimes, right? I think we all know that. And he's saying that the ego speaks very honestly about your being, right? Who are you? What is the beingness of you? Sometimes you can perceive that through the ego. What is this person about? They're being about this. Well, they're being occupied by their being, which is linked to their ego, which is a reflection of their consciousness and inner values. It's what they're being about. So I would say, yeah, he has a point, that it can be confusing and contradictory the way in which the ego expresses itself, but at the same time, it's honest. That's why if you see creepy dudes who keep making topics on sex, that's their ego, that's their beingness. If you see others who are, just doing videos, doing candy reviews or something, that's kind of like, what is their brain occupied by? And that shows you what is their being. What is rooted in them? What is essential in them? What's a strong thread within them that it can be yanked out and examined as their ego. It's really quite interesting. And it does have sometimes a contradictory aspect, right? This creating, willing, and valuing ego, which is the measure and value of all things. So here, he has another great point. So the creating, willing, valuing ego, this is the measure and value of all things. So here, your ego shows what you value. Your ego shows what you're willing to do and what you're not willing to do. Okay? Your ego shows what you're going to create. Okay? What are you about? What are you upon? What's your mission? Okay? And through those things, I can see a reflection of your mind. I can see inside you in a particular way. Not literally, but I see a feather upon you, right? In your vast array of feathers. I see a piece of you by what you value, what you're willing and not willing to do, and what you're creating, which shows your ego, right? And this most honest being, the ego, speaks of the body and still wants the body, even when it poeticizes and raves and flutters with broken wings. Good point. So here, what has he said? Okay? That the body, and the ego, they're linked to each other, and they still love your body, even if you think of it as some whimsical, the damsel in her neck and her fine swan-like neck was so voluptuous, right? You've poeticized the body. And then, the raves was another one. And it was a horrible body, had no toes. One arm was missing with scars on its back. Like, that's kind of the raving part, right? And then flutters with broken wings, so some type of ailment. Broken rib, something isn't functioning, you got one working eye, a crooked nose, something imperfect. Yet, the ego in the body, even if it raves and poeticizes and flutters within that frame of the body, or about the body, it still links to it. It still is attached to it. It's quite interesting the way he speaks. It learns to speak ever more honestly, this ego. And the more it learns, the more words and honors it finds for body and earth. Okay, so think about that. It learns to speak ever more honestly. So the ego starts to kind of code up, starts to level up. And it finds more grammar. Through the grammar, it'll honor what it finds about the body, what it does, how it works, how it's used, how it's misused. And then that same skill, this sort of observation, sort of kind of coding up your consciousness, will then be used to examine earth around you. And this ego will speak honestly about what it finds in the body and what it finds on earth. So he has a very unique way of talking about the ego. Because usually when people talk about the ego, they say it in a negative way. Like, you're so egotistical. usually that's like an insult. And some people are that way. But some people who have Buddhistic talking points, they're like, you need to shred the ego. There is no I. There is only blah, 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 blah. Then you kind of go into another philosophical train of the Tibetan monks, right? But here he's getting at something different. He's speaking of the ego in a quite unique way that makes you think regardless, right? A new pride my ego taught me, and this I teach men. No longer to bury one's head in the sand of heavenly things, but to bear it freely. An earthly head, which creates a meaning for the earth. Oh, that's potent. You can see why he affected people. Alright? Because he's saying, the new pride my ego. So the ego has an element of pride, which we understand that for sure. But nonetheless, it taught him something. And what it taught him here is that to not just be overly optimistic about what lies in the unseen, but instead to bear your burdens more freely. And this will help you be more grounded in the earth, and that will then create meaning for you upon the earth and for the earth. You see what he's getting at? Now, this depends on which religion angle you're coming from here, because some Buddhists, they want to leave. They want to go to nirvana. They're totally trying to exit this circumference area. Us Muslims, when we focus in Salah, we're trying to connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When I focus on Tawheed and trying to find the oneness of Allah, no shirk, I'm just trying to connect. I have my head in the heavenly things, as you would say. But he says bury one's head, so maybe he's taken a stab at the monastic lifestyle of some Catholic monks, where they cut themselves off in a hermitage and busy themselves with, scholarly aims, trying to endure their sufferings in another way, and trying to find meaning for the sufferings. He seems to have a different angle of, you just bear it freely, don't overly submerge yourself, right? And instead have an earthly head that's grounded, and then look about. Now, I would say you can have a bit of both. You see the practical dunya, and then you see what you want to strive for paradise, and know that Allah knows best, and that you're tested, you have your qadar, you have your destiny set for you, and that you must think of the akhirah, the hereafter, but you also have to know to pay your bills on time, and then watch out for criminals, stuff like that. So I'd say you need a bit of both. Here you can see he's more focused on the earthly affair. Very interesting. What do you think, fam? He has great points. Very interesting the way he talks about ego. And quite nerdy. What do you think?